So in your mind, was Oliver a true believer that the Book of Mormon was of divine origin, even as he was acting as the scribe and the translator?
I know at some point he became involved, especially with the angelic ordinations in the mid-1830s. He's willing to lie at a very early time. In 1830, Joseph Smith was tried on the same charges as the 1826 trial. They saw that he had resumed his treasure-seeing activities. And so they tried to retry him again in South Bainbridge, and he beat that charge on the statutes of limitations. It was more than 3 years. Then they took him to Colesville and tried to say that he was still continuing his practices through his Book of Mormon activity. They said, well, you were using the same stone that you dug treasure with to translate the Book of Mormon. And so it's basically the same thing. You're breaking the law. Oliver Cowdery, according to this guy named Benton, who was there and who wrote or testified about it in the newspaper, only a year later, said that Oliver Cowdery said, no, it wasn't the stone. It was the Urim and Thummim. It was the spectacles. It was the instrument that came with the plates, which is not true, because every witness, even when Cowdery was scribe, says that the stone was in the hat. David Whitmer in Fayette, and his sister, Martin Harris, Emma Smith, says the stone was in the hat. Emma Smith said it was never used. The stone was never, the Urim and Thummim, the spectacles were never used after the loss of the 116 pages, and that she would be working around Oliver Cowdery and Joseph Smith while they were working. So Oliver Cowdery lied on the witness stand in July 1830 to save Joseph Smith from prosecution.
Of what?
Because he was retried in Colesville on the 1826 charge of using the seer stone, which was illegal. And so they tried to say that using the stone in the hat was the same thing as looking for treasures in the hat. It's still illegal. So that's what the prosecution was trying to use. So Oliver Cowdery says, no, he didn't use the stone. It was another instrument that he got with the plates, the spectacles, basically. And so that was reason for saying that he hadn't continued the activity, because it had nothing to do with seer stones. And so Oliver Cowdery was willing, and he was willing all his life, really, to say it was the spectacles, even when he came back into the church. So he believed enough in Joseph Smith's project of saving souls through this method, and believed perhaps he believed that Joseph Smith was inspired, that he would lie for it. Even with the ordination, he believed that it was necessary to tell these stories in order to hold the church together, to thwart usurpers, and to put it on a firmer foundation. Oliver Cowdery also had ambitions of replacing Joseph Smith, actually. So he was willing to perpetuate an untruth for a greater truth at a certain point. So when he met Joseph Smith, he was a true believer. He presented himself as having had a vision of the Lord and the plates. The 1832 history near the end says when Oliver Cowdery came to Joseph Smith, he had already had a vision of the Lord, had already shown him the plates in a vision or a dream vision or whatever it was when he came. So he was very fanatical, according to Lucy. He couldn't talk about anything else. So I believe he was a true believer, very fanatical, very impressionistic. He could have been manipulated by Joseph Smith to see another vision, or maybe the three witnesses' testimony that was good enough for him to participate in that. But so I believe he was a true believer, willing. He showed Joseph Smith his willingness to lie on the witness stand to keep him from being imprisoned or fined or whatever was their intention. And when it came to, he was the first one to write about an angel coming and ordaining them in the Messenger and Advocate in 1834, in September 1834, and it was at a crisis period when it seemed like the Missouri Church was going to splinter off, and could go away with taking the Holy Land of Zion with them. So, and Joseph Smith called it a crucial period in the history. And Albert Cowdery came and told about an angel in a letter to W.W. Phelps in Missouri, said that this will strengthen your faith. And that was September. In December, he was elevated from the printer. He was the second elder in the church, but that was only because he was the second elder in the church. It wasn't anything special, really. He was elevated from that printer in the newspaper to being second in authority in the church, above Sidney Rigdon. Sidney Rigdon was the first counselor in the presidency, and Frederick G. Williams. And Oliver Cowdery was all of a sudden raised to be assistant president.
And you're saying in part because he was willing to do Joseph's bidding. Is that what you're saying?
He was willing to go in with Joseph Smith to save the church from splintering. Right. Because the thing is once you say we were ordained by angels, you can't have some charismatic Bishop Partridge over here, or David Whitmer as president of the church in Missouri splintering off, because Joseph Smith gets ordained, Joseph Smith and Oliver Cowdery, and everybody else's authority depends on the chain, like Catholicism.
Right.
So that changed it from a more Protestant, charismatic kind of concept of an inner authority, the command from the angel. Now it's actual ordination by an angel with undisputed credentials.
Right. So
and it's a chain, and it centralizes the authority.
Yep.
And then
so Joseph could maintain control.
Right.
So going back to the Book of Mormon, you believe that Olive believed that he was transcribing Joseph's inspiration.
Yeah.
That he believed that Joseph was indeed translating.
As far as I know, I mean,
that's your belief.
It's possible there was more to it, but there's not a clue.
Okay, that you found.
Yeah,
okay.
Not a clue that I've ever found.
And so that's why people want to know, well, if Oliver was a co-conspirator when he and Joseph had their falling out, he would have eventually told on Joseph. And you're saying he did never do that because he always believed that it was from Joseph. And I'm just going to corroborate what you said with just some factoids that I learned. I learned recently that when Jim Jones from the People's Temple would perform fake miracles, like pull out chicken gizzards and make it seem like he had pulled those as if he was exorcising demons from some of his, congregants. And some of his followers eventually realized that he was defrauding people, but they never exposed him because they believed, that Jim Jones's larger cause, bringing people to Christ or whatever, was divine. Mm-hmm. And they themselves justified it, saying that as long as he's bringing people to Christ, it doesn't matter if he's using fake miracles to persuade them to believe. So there's a real instance in modern history that would back up your idea that Oliver could have been a sincere believer in the Book of Mormon, but still later been willing to tell lies for the cause, following Joseph's example.
Well, I believe he was trying to save the church from Joseph Smith, who he believed was going in the wrong direction, being too militaristic, being too worldly. The God's kingdom is of this world kind of a thing, and he also knew about what Joseph Smith's polygamy or early dabblings in it. Whenever Fanny Alger happened, I'm not sure of the date that happened, but Oliver Cowdery did try to use that against Joseph Smith, and it would have led to a trial. And if something happened, Oliver Cowdery would have been in charge of the church.
Right, he could have taken over.
He could have taken over.
Okay.
And I have other evidence, but I won't mention what it is.
Why?
I have other evidence that Cowdery all along, and Joseph Smith feared what Cowdery was doing, and they were playing chicken with each other, or whatever you want to call it, sort of like Samuel Lawrence and Joseph Smith, the little confidence thing that Samuel Lawrence and Joseph Smith was doing. Oliver Cowdery and Joseph Smith were doing sort of like that too.
Okay. All right. So we've kind of covered a lot of ground about the Book of Mormon. What else do we need to, okay, let's go back quickly just to the timeline, because we've made allusions to it, but I wanted to talk about it in some sort of chronological sequence. But the main thing the brethren seem to be resting on these days is that it was written in only 90 days, right?
Yeah.
And that, so again, Joseph was too dumb, the book is too amazing, and the time period was too short for it to be written in that time period. We've already addressed that Joseph was smarter than they give him credit for, and you're positing, and many agree, that the book is a lot less impressive. Now let's just talk about the time frame. Does the Book of Mormon have to have been written in 90 days? Could it have been written over 9 months or a year? You may have already alluded to this, but what's your answer to that, the timeline?
I don't know.
For you, how long?
I think he did it all right there, because as I mentioned, it seems to allude to things that are happening with Martin Harris or Oliver Cowdery in the early chapters of Mosiah. Seemed like it's happening. He didn't know Christ was coming. He didn't know what other parts of the story were going to be. He was writing it as he was going. He was thinking about it. He was probably very religious about it, praying about it, hoping to get the right words, just like any patriarch. And but the thing is that he dictated fairly long revelations. There's one story of Howard Corey, his scribe. Pretty neat little story where they were trying to find some kind of notes or sermon, and they couldn't find them. And then finally, Joseph Smith says, "Okay, just get a pencil, get a pen and paper. I'll dictate what I need." And so he starts dictating, and this text starts flowing out of him. And Corey says he's writing this and writing this and writing this. And when it was over, it was like a revelation. And when it was over, he wanted to just bow, and kiss his feet and worship Joseph Smith, because it was unbelievable to him that Joseph Smith could just dictate this. He said he looked in his eyes sideways, and Joseph Smith just stared forward the whole time while he was dictating this. So, there is a thing in the difference between a Presbyterian minister and a Methodist or Baptist minister. Presbyterians and Congregationalists would prepare their texts, and they'd be all learned and have the Latin phrases and Bible commentary and very impressive. But Methodist ministers, would, some of these revival preachers wouldn't have a prepared text. They would have an outline probably, but they would get up, and when the sermon would flow, and it would be very emotional, it would be so emotional, some of these preachers, that people would, fall down and convulse and speak in tongues and get very carried away. They could work the audience up that way. And it was flowing. And the more it flowed, the more they believed that the Spirit was working through them or upon them. Now, if these guys can do that, why can't Joseph Smith? Why can't Joseph Smith do the same thing when he's dictating the Book of Mormon or any of his sermons or his revelations? This is not beyond the human ability. I mean, he was really into doing it. That was his thing, or else he wouldn't be doing it. But
someone references a theory or some statement at some point that Oliver gave a law partner an indication that it was all a hoax. That at some point Oliver did tell someone that he believed it was a hoax. Are you aware of anything like that?
Not off the top of my head.
Okay.
But there are stories where he reaffirmed his testimony many times in court. So the law partner, I think I've heard that story, and I don't know, what to make of it. It stands alone if it does exist. I think it was, what was the guy's name? Lane, something like that. But I think I heard of it in conjunction with usually the Spalding theory. But I don't. He came back into the church though, and reaffirmed his testimony. But I don't know why he would tell anybody it was a hoax. I mean, it's possible that he knew certain parts were hoax, like the angelic ordinations. So maybe he did say something. I don't know.
Okay. Some talk about a Miners Hill cave where it could have been written. What are your thoughts about the fact that it could have been written in some cave somewhere separate?
There's always outliers, what we call outliers. When you have data, you have this data, pool of data. You'll always find outliers, things that just do not fit. And you don't know what to do with them necessarily, like just note that they're there. There's nothing to substantiate those outliers. They're late. They're usually late accounts in Palmyra. I think it's a Palmyra resident or something. But the Miners Hill thing, probably, I don't know why would Joseph Smith go over there? Why Lorenzo Sanders would allow Joseph Smith to go on their property if they were still there. I'm not sure how long they were there on that property, but I'm pretty sure they were there. But Joseph Smith didn't translate the Book of Mormon in Palmyra. It would have been very early, from September when he got them and to December when he left. So during that period, the only thing that comes out is that he's making copies of the characters off the plates, maybe doing preliminary kind of translation. But why would he be in this hill? I don't know.
Okay.
But, folklore, how folklore is.
Okay. And I'm covering, I just asked you this, but I want to make sure I solidify it in my mind. You believe he wrote or dictated the text that now comprises the Book of Mormon in what period of time?
90 days.
So you believe he did it in 90 days?
Yeah, why not?
It wasn't 3 years where he was working on it.
Oh, he's thinking about it. I mean, how can he not think about things and practice He's been talking about the plates since 1823. He has the plates there. And like I said, I believe he was reading them from his stone and telling his family stories.
So some of the stories that he would have told his family, you think may have ended up in the book?
I think it was early dry runs, practices,
Okay.
But he had time to think about it. I don't know if he was thinking about it constantly because he didn't really plan on the 1827 taking the plates out. But at some point, he probably started thinking about getting the plates and he must have had a plan, must have had an idea before he'd even decided, hey, I'm going to the hill to get the plates.
Okay. And so for you, no pre-written manuscript, it's all coming out of his brain.
It's possible. And then he memorized parts. I mean, it's always possible that he had something that when he went out to pray in the woods, he would read. But how do you demonstrate that from the data? You can't. It's
Okay.
not in the data anyway.
Okay. Someone wrote, how do you deal with Brian Hales, who basically says the sentences, how did Joseph dictate all those 5,394 sentences without any major structural changes to any of them? It's too impossible. So that's the basic Brian Hales claim again, that too many sentences to dictate orally. I think you've probably already addressed that.
Well, most of it, like I said, is year by year, and they're not connected to anything before. And where it gets really involved in detail is the chronology, the timekeeping devices. And when you really analyze, they change their dating for when Christ comes or when the new star appears.
What do you mean they changed the dating?
The dating method. At first it was 600 years before the coming of Christ. It was so many years after leaving Jerusalem.
Yeah, I guess you wouldn't have been counting your years in terms of before Christ and after Christ in America as a Native American. So he's imposing the AD BC sort of way of thinking about time back on Native Americans.
Yeah,
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, when he comes back to the beginning, Lehi gives a 600-year prophecy. But before that, there is this chronology of so many years from the time we left Jerusalem. And it kind of goes that way. Or then it goes, according to the year of the judges, right? And then it's so many years from the time that this new star appears. So they have to link up the 600 years, the new star, and they start the time over again. 600 years. Boom. And it's a little tricky, but this is his book. He worked it out. So then it goes, so you get to, your 34th year after the appearance of the new star, which in the Gospels isn't a real star. So it appears and then moves over above where Jesus was born. It's moving around. It's not really a new star, in the galaxy or whatever.
What was the Golden Bible Company? What do you make of that? What is it? And what was its intent?
I just think that's Palmyra residents talking, they're blending the money digging thing into the gold Bible thing and making it sound the same. I don't think they sold shares to the gold plates, So
Joseph didn't put together a Golden Bible Company as far as you're concerned.
there were people that probably claimed there was a gold Bible company when they were digging in 1826 on the side of that hill.
Okay.
And that's might be the origin of it, but I think they used it to kind of slander Joseph Smith or make fun of him, mock him or whatever.
Okay. So did anybody ever see those tin plates uncovered entirely that you're aware of?
No. The 8 witnesses the best reconstruction of the 8 witnesses, although the written testimony has very elliptical kind of language that makes it sound all, naturalistic. John Whitmer said, according to Theodore Turley's reminiscence in 1845, and it was put in the history of the church, he questioned John Whitmer in Missouri, and John Whitmer said he saw them by the power of God, and it was a spiritual sight. So my best reconstruction was that they handled the plates in the cloth, felt them. It could have even been allusions to previous times, but saw the plates through the cloth, like Martin Harris claimed. Now, Martin Harris, in 1830, as early as 1838, in Kirtland, Ohio, when there were, apostates, Martin Harris being one of them, they were debating whether they should still believe the Book of Mormon or not after the Kirtland Bank failed, and they were disbelieving in Joseph Smith but believing the Book of Mormon, and some people were disbelieving Joseph Smith altogether and starting a new Church of Christ, and some of them still hung on to the Book of Mormon and believed Joseph Smith was a fallen prophet. Martin Harris was trying to talk them into still believing the Book of Mormon, although he provided them evidence to explain it away. And so it's not just this. Martin Harris is being reported by this Bennett. Anyway, Martin Harris got up and was talking to a congregation and saying that basically no one saw the plates uncovered, that everyone, including Joseph Smith, saw them spiritually. And he's going off of DNC 17, which promises the 3 witnesses, you shall see them with the eye of faith, even as my servant Joseph Smith has seen them. Which some people try to interpret, including Martin Harris, that even Joseph Smith sees them spiritually. No, what the Revelation is trying to say is that the 3 witnesses, after they see them with the eye of faith, are to testify that they saw them naturalistically like Joseph Smith. That it wasn't, a hallucination or whatever. It was a real angel with real plates in front of them, not a spiritual sight. So the 8 witnesses were not anticipated, really, but it came along, and Joseph Smith seems to have taken advantage of it. And Martin Harris, in his 1838 speech, says that he never saw them he never saw them with the natural eye, and even the 8 witnesses never saw them with the natural eye. And that's why they hesitated to sign the testimony. And
and they didn't actually sign it, right? One person wrote that whole thing.
They
and
probably
signed their
signed
signatures.
it. No, but one person wrote it because it's a unifying document to unify all of them. And even the 3 witnesses is a unifying document because it doesn't really happen the way the document describes. But the 8 witnesses, it's a unifying document, and it's general so that all can sign. They all signed it, but it got copied. And there's a lot of critics that go off on the wrong track and saying, it's one person's signature. Well, they're talking about the printer's manuscript. We don't have the original testimonies. All we have is the printer's manuscript where Oliver Cowdery copied it into that manuscript. But David Whitmer says that they all signed it. They all signed their names to the 3 witnesses anyway. So, but that's not the issue. They all stood by their testimonies all their life, whatever that testimony meant. So, the Martin Harris, in his 1838 statement, goes on to say that he saw the plates many times as they sat on his knee, although they were covered with a cloth. He saw them as you would see in your mind's eye a city through a hill, through a mountain. So I used Martin Harris's description of seeing them through the cloth as a model for solving the problem of how did they handle the plates, but yet John Whitmer and Martin Harris says that they saw them spiritually. So how could they handle them and see them spiritually, which is they saw them through the cloth. And then they wrote it in an elliptical way to make it just sound, it was a matter of fact, everyday viewing of the plates. They turn them, the leaves, which they can do through the cloth. But so there's John Whitmer, there's Martin Harris making that statement. There's the DNC 17 says they shall see them with the eye of faith, just as same as Joseph Smith. So a week later, there's people seeing them naturally. That doesn't fit. So that's my reconstruction. The thing is that the testimony of three witnesses, when you read it, you see all three witnesses there, the angel, Joseph Smith standing there with the three witnesses. But we know Martin Harris later testified, years later, that he had to leave the group. And Joseph Smith's history, this is the first inkling that we got that Martin Harris wasn't with the other two witnesses, that he had to go off on his own, and then Joseph Smith had to come, and then they prayed together, and then Martin Harris had a separate vision. But they signed the document as if they all three saw the angel together. So, and naturally, and it doesn't mention a lot of other things like seeing the table. There was a table with the Liahona, the Urim and Thummim, and the sword and the breastplate by the angel. It never mentions angel speaking, which David Whitmer talks about the angel speaking. So you could tell it's a unifying, and if you tried to reconstruct their vision historically, it wouldn't match what they later revealed about their experience. It would be like the paintings, all of them together, and the angel. So you're on dangerous ground when you try to do that with the testimony of 8 witnesses. Read their testimony and try to paint a picture with the plates sitting on a log and them turning the pages. You're on very dangerous ground, because that's most likely not what happened.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so with the three witnesses, you believe that Martin Harris, Oliver Cowdery, and David Whitmer all believed that they saw a vision of an angel and plates. Is that right?
Yeah. And
the 8 witnesses were probably able to feel these tin plates that Joseph had created through a cloth. Mm-hmm. But when they saw them again in some sort of visionary state.
Right.
That's kind of your theory. But that they were all sincere believers.
Well, the important thing is that all these people or all the ones that we have documentation for, demonstrate that they have the capability of visions. And Martin Harris is visionary. David Whitmer has visions right before his vision of the plates. He sees an angel while he's plowing. The angel talks to him. Even the words that the history of the church puts in Moroni's mouth at the three witnesses experience, David Whitmer says that actually occurred before in the field. And Oliver Cowdery never says anything ever about his testimony as one of the three witnesses, never describes it ever. So it's possible that Oliver Cowdery is in the group because he had seen the angel in his dream vision before he met Joseph Smith. So you don't have three people seeing the same vision at the same time. Although there is documentation of group hallucinations where it appears that they all see the same thing at the same time, like at Lourdes or whatever. Other similar experiences, like the Shakers see they have 8 witnesses that saw the angel on the roof with the holy roll. Once they have the experience, they could talk about it during and suggest one another, pollinate one another while it's happening.
Like a narrator that's like, can you see this now? And there's the angel. Can you see it? Yes, I see it.
That's what I believe Joseph Smith did.
Yeah.
That's why
I think Fawn Brody talks about that too.
Yeah, I give that example of Joseph Smith and Sidney Rigdon in having the three heavens vision. The actual written document is not the vision. It's a version of the vision. So you don't know what they were saying or what Sidney Rigdon actually saw. The document unified the experience.
Right. So afterwards.
Right.
Now, there's a pattern there.
Right. So there's a reason why when there's a crime, police don't let people talk to each other, because they'll infect the other person's testimony, even their memory. Your memory can be affected, and they think they saw the same thing.
Yeah. Even if they're sincere.
Exactly. So once the witnesses start talking to each other, it's
over.
you've got an amalgamation starting. Plus, there is a tradition among the early Mormons that you don't necessarily see the same vision. Remember, Nephi corrects his father. His father didn't see certain things, and corrects what the vision meant, what he saw but didn't notice. So there is some testimony by Abner Cole that the witnesses actually gave different descriptions of what the plates look like. So he describes Martin Harris said this, David Whitmer said that. And David Whitmer himself says he didn't think Martin Harris saw all that they had seen.
Right.
So it's an effect, and it's like I said, documented. I didn't make up the group hallucination theory or anything. I just I documented it in my articles.
Okay. For those who so in your mind, again, the 3 witnesses and the 8 witnesses all sincerely believe that Joseph translated this through the gift and power of God, and none of them were co-conspirators.
We have no hint. It's unnecessary if they were co-conspirators. Joe Smith's head is in the hat repeating this stuff. And I believe when David Whitmer says this is what happened, he's basically sincere. There is a tendency for them to exaggerate miracles, like Emma Smith. There's no possible way, or Joseph Smith that didn't know that Jerusalem was a walled city. I think that's feigned on his part, but there's no way he could start and stop without me reading back any part. And he was so unlearned, and I think all of that's exaggerated. They want to, in their descriptions, they're trying to prove to their readers that they weren't schmucks, that they weren't gullible. They're trying to defend their reputations too. I had evidence. I know for sure he could not have done this or that. And it's the same thing when you interview people after they have a seance or get a cold reading or see a magic show, and that is, they exaggerate the miracle part of it. I've done an experiment one time online. I showed him a film of David Blaine on doing magic on the street, and he put his hand through a window or whatever, and so then I said, okay, tell me what happened. Let's do an experiment. Tell me what you saw, and they would describe it. And it's totally a miracle how he did it. It's just no way that he could have done it if he tried to do it the way they described. So there's always a tendency to exaggerate the miracle, which is what I see in the witnesses' statements of him reading precisely the words and Overcrowder repeating back. If it wasn't exactly the same, it wouldn't disappear from the stone, and
Right.
going on and on like that, making it more miraculous than it was.
Okay. I guess maybe one of the biggest questions then to ask, and I think you've already suggested this, but just to be explicit, did Joseph believe, A, that he was channeling revelation from God in his creation of the Book of Mormon? And B, did Joseph believe he was really dictating somehow an ancient record, even though the plates weren't really golden plates and they really weren't forged by Mormon or whoever, and they really weren't delivered to him by Moroni, that he was still somehow channeling a legitimate ancient record, even though he had to deceive people about the mechanics of how it was created. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
What did Joseph believe was going on
So,
in your mind?
on one level, it's not important, but the fact
Why?
that
Why do
the
you
Book
say
of
that?
Mormon's not history, that's one conclusion. So, like I said,
It's not, so it's not important why.
Scholars can't decide whether it really is inspired or not.
Right.
Because, did God talk to Joseph Smith or what? We can't do that. So we can try to figure out whether Joseph Smith believed it and how he believed it. And so I would say Joseph Smith, he taught his followers how to receive revelations like he receives revelations. The burning in the bosom, the working it out in the mind. Patriarchs are a good model for this, because they go to, I see them at the historical department of the church, coming in and reading other patriarchal blessings and learning the language and, what is expected for a patriarchal blessing. And they learn it. But when they get up there and they fast, they pray, they hope God leads them to say the right words, but they don't hear words. They're not given the words in a mechanical fashion, but they still feel like they're inspired in giving the words. So I think Joseph Smith was sort of like that. And whether he thought, there's some sort of ancient book behind this, I don't think he did. I don't think he was delusional. But I think he felt it was inspired and it would work. And God, he felt inspired while he was doing it. He had a definition of truth. Whatever testifies of Jesus and commands to do good is inspired and sent forth by the gift and power of God, that the devil would do no good. He would inspire no man to do good, no, not one. That's the language. And that in that principle, the Book of Mormon is inspired. And the fact that the conversions happened and people felt the Spirit and even spoke in tongues. That was one of the signs. Early Mormons really emphasized tongues, even though they don't anymore. These were all signs that God had approved of the method. So he believed the Book of Mormon was inspired and it brought people to Jesus. And most importantly, he got a following that he believed gave him more power to do more good to save America, all of America, from the secret combination, it had turned away from Jesus. That's what the Book of Ether, the one thing about Jackson was that he wasn't only a Mason, he believed in the separation of church and state. States' rights instead of federal rights. Central government, he believed in states' rights instead. And before the fall of the Nephites, they break into tribes, and they forget the God of this land. That's what it says in Ether. It not only warns of this secret combination, when this secret combination gets above you, it also says, when you forget the God of this land, Jesus Christ, you shall be swept off. And when Jesus comes to America, the prediction is that the New Jerusalem would be built, and that the believing Gentiles will unite with the Indian, and that they shall go through and tear to pieces. And it's taking a passage from the book of Micah in the Old Testament. Jesus is quoting it, and it's taking off from that. It's riffing off of that passage and saying that they shall be swept off as a lion to the prey. And that's what frightened the Missourians. That's why the Missourians were scared to death of the Mormons. And so they took unconstitutional, perhaps, means to get rid of the problem, because they were the Mormons. This first generation Mormons, they were not like current Mormons. They were very charismatic and fired up,
right,
and frightening, and frightening to their neighbors. Right. Scared them to death, and they got political power quickly because they believed in Zionism. Zionism is what caused the problem in Missouri. It was the gathering together into larger groups. And they said, once you get kicked out of here, stay in separate groups. They explicitly said, do not gather together like that. Stay in splintered groups.
Because too much danger, too much power.
You scared the hell out of people. And the Indians are like right there on the frontier, and the book is making these predictions. They were scared out of their minds, and that's why they went above and beyond the law and persecuted the Mormons,
Right, because they were scared and desperate. So, in your mind, Joseph Smith felt like the ends of making up a story about how he created the book justified the means of creating a pseudopographic text that testified of Christ, when he was really just trying to fabricate ancient Native American prophets based on the mound builder myths that could then add credence or credibility to
to Joseph Smith's words.
Yeah.
Because face it, nobody would buy a theological book written by a farm boy. They're just not going to go anywhere. He's not going to have any authority. Nobody's going to listen to him.
Right.
And he had ideas that he wanted desperately. That, like, I go back to Max Weber and the mission, that has him fired up, and Joseph Smith fired up with this vision. He has a vision, a revolutionary vision, and he acts it out. But it totally fails, and that's what usually happens with narcissists, that it just totally ends up failing. And
yeah. Okay. And so in the end, again, you said that his ultimate ambition was to create some theocracy, to create the New Jerusalem, Zion,
the New Jerusalem government,
to usher in usher in the second coming of Jesus, and that's why we're called the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, as an indication of that end times apocalyptic kind of teachings, which fits very well with Christianity. How do you explain really quickly that the Book of Mormon wasn't really emphasized in the early years of the church, if Joseph Smith intended it to be so instrumental and critical? why was it not really mentioned or emphasized in the first years of the church?
Well, mostly because they were using the Bible as a proof text to convert people, to beat them in arguments, to make them pause, if you believe this in the Bible, you're a hypocrite if you reject our thing, So, yeah, the Book of Mormon wasn't quoted as much as you think it would. We don't know what this is in print anyway. Joseph Smith is not quoting it. Even you see it in his King Follett discourse. He's quoting the Bible all over the place, trying to convince people, of certain doctrines that they have missed in the Bible. It's in his Revelations. Sort of when you fail at establishing the Zion, you just kind of not want to quote it. But like I said, they were quoting it in Missouri, which is what scared people in Missouri. When they would quote those passages, they would quote the scary parts, and the anti-Mormons or Missourians would quote them back in their complaints. This is what they've quoted out of this book. This book gives them authority to this land, and this is what they plan on doing.
But I guess another way to ask the question is, did the Book of Mormon achieve the purposes that Joseph intended? It ultimately led to him starting the church.
Yeah.
And do you think that was his plan all along? From 1827 to 1830, he was going to start a church?
Well, yeah. Well, and the church wasn't going to be around that long. He was going to Missouri, set up a church with apostles. The apostle thing got delayed, mostly because the Cowdery didn't want apostles. Mostly because the revelation that in June 1829, the revelation that talked about apostles being established, assigned David Whitmer and Oliver Cowdery to pick the apostles, which meant that they were out of the hierarchy.
Right.
They didn't like that. So what happened was a compromise in the Articles and Covenants of the church was D&C 20. The Articles and Covenants of the church talks about apostles, but it says apostles are elders. So the elder, it was distributed among all the elders because apostles were the charismatic leaders, lead by the Spirit, and elders were to lead meetings by the Spirit. And so that was the early connection. It was kind of dissipated among all the elders. And the hierarchy didn't start until 1835, February 1835, where Cowdery does it. But Cowdery is already second in command, so he's safe. So he now goes along with the 12 apostle idea. And he's the guy that helps organize it. The three witnesses actually do. But Cowdery is the one that speaks to the 12 apostles and says, you have your authority from the angel, meaning Moroni, with the plates. Not any, the ordinations haven't been introduced, at least Peter, James, and John haven't. The angel that gave him authority to baptize was mentioned in September 1834. 1835, the apostles are organized. Then when the Doctrine and Covenants is published in September 1835, a few months after the apostles, because he didn't say that you're apostles because Peter, James, and John ordained us. That would have been a good opportunity, but he didn't. It isn't until the Doctrine and Covenants is published and the additions Joseph Smith made to earlier revelations, D&C 27, makes allusions. You shall drink the fruit of the vine afresh with Moroni, and it goes on to Peter, James, and John, and John the Baptist whom I am sent you, Peter, James, and John who gave you the keys of the apostleship. So it was invented between that time and the time they revised that revelation. So that was another thing that they agreed on, I guess. But
did the Book of Mormon help Joseph start the church? Was it what role did it play in helping Joseph successfully start a church.
It became more of a symbol after time.
A symbol of what?
Charismatic authority, that there's a prophet.
It gave him legitimacy.
Yeah, legitimacy. See, and that's what the charismatic leader does, is give others legitimacy. And it was largely through the book and through his revelations. But his doctrine eventually started evolving beyond it. And
right. It contains, that's something that other believers have to reconcile, is the Book of Mormon doesn't have 3 degrees of glory. It doesn't have pre-existence. It doesn't have temple work. It doesn't have baptisms for the dead. It doesn't have the endowment. It doesn't have polygamy. Just so many things that are crucial in Nauvoo don't exist at all.
The things we cherish about, when I was a Mormon, planet salvation, gods and planets and everything seemed to make sense. It all seemed,
and it doesn't have a Trinitarian, doesn't even have a Trinitarian deity, right? It's
right.
It's got
it has the modalism it's called, but and his theology evolves to separate. God and Christ are separate beings and not the same being. In the Book of Mormon,
they're the same.
God comes down, dwells in Jesus. So. Right. And then that evolves, the theology evolves, and that they're separate persons. Finally, the Holy Ghost is a personage instead of just a ethereal kind of spirit to essence. In the lectures on faith, it's the mind. The Holy Ghost is the mind that connects Jesus, the body, with God as a spirit being.
Right.
So, but yeah, it evolves. And Joe Smith brought heaven down. He got rid of all that complicated theology, philosophy kind of stuff, made it more down to earth, brought humans up to their, like a potential gods, things like that. So he had a lot of things that were very, clever, appealing. He knew what he was doing.
Sure. So you've been so generous. We're coming up on 5 hours after doing 3, so we will have completed 8 hours today. You've been very generous, and I've got just pages of questions I haven't been able to ask you yet. But because my chip is about to run out of time, and we're supposed to go to a party, and you're probably exhausted, I'm going to end with this. What if you had to summarize the biggest, and just summarize the biggest indications for you that the Book of Mormon is not a historical document, is not what it claims to be? What are the categories of those biggest evidences, just as a summary point, to kind of wrap everything we've talked about today together?
Oh, there's so much actually. Without the apologists around massaging everything, trying to keep it alive, it would have died a long time ago. It doesn't necessarily have to die as a religious text.
But as a historical document, what condemns it? The biggest things that condemn it in your mind? Just list them as categories.
Well, okay. To me, the literary and historical anachronisms, it describes the mound builder myth, which included all of the North, Central, and South America. It wasn't some limited geography thing. The book describes exactly what people believed about the mound builders, that all the mounds and created a chain, and that one theory was that they landed in South America, they built those great civilizations, and they deteriorated as they went north into the Mississippi and up into the Great Lakes region, where they were finally destroyed. So and the book describes the land northward, land southward, with a narrow neck of land, and I can go into detail of why it doesn't fit anywhere else, no matter what the apologists try to do.
Okay.
And the book it doesn't describe reality. It's as if the Nephites didn't know the Mayans and the other people were here, and the Mayans didn't know they were there.
Okay. What else? Keep going with the big categories.
the Indian, there's no Jewish heritage for the Indian. They are from Asia, like more scientific minds believed. There were no Jaredites that brought all the seeds and animals in 8 barges and repopulated America. It's a silly story. The flood didn't wipe away all the living here, and they didn't all get destroyed conveniently before Lehi came, and they didn't split into 2 groups, and one became the Indian, and
God doesn't.
This is what the Book of Mormon describes. Now, the apologists try to massage that, and make up little loophole, try to invent little loopholes. But I say they're working way too hard. If you have to work that hard to make things fit, it's really not worth it.
And there's way too much 19th century content in the book, right?
Yes. Well, the King James Version, including all the mistakes and mistranslations of the King James, is in it.
King James English is a problem.
There are incongruencies between when Joseph Smith wrote the first part. He wrote things that contradicted other parts, especially when you get to the seam where it connects with Mosiah. There's certain things that happen that can't happen the way it describes, and I don't know. It was believable at the time. That's the thing, is that the Book of Mormon was totally believable at the time, and nobody noticed the geography. Everybody assumed, oh yeah, it was the whole continent. I mean, for the longest time I believed it as a Mormon. Oh, the whole continent. Well, now that you think of it, it's ridiculous. I mean, it could be the history of the whole continent, and people are traveling all over it. And it's like B.H. Roberts wrote in this thing, it's a fairy tale,
Yeah.
But it doesn't, the thing is that if the Mormons want to go in the direction, this is where I think the apologists should go, is in the direction that it's a revelation, not historical, but it's a revelation.
That is where they're going.
Yeah, I think they are.
Spencer Fluman's saying it's Joseph's grandest revelation.
Yeah.
Moving away from the idea that it was a translation.
That's the way to go. Although I have problems with that, but still, it's the only way to go. I've known it for 30 years.
All right. Well, everyone, you've been very patient. We thank you so much for sticking with us. And most importantly, Dan Vogel, we just so honor you or appreciate you. The book of many books is Joseph Smith, The Making of a Prophet. It goes into much more detail than we were able to cover today. Buy this book. It's better than Rough Stone Rolling. It's as important to me as Fawn Brody's book, No Man Knows My History. Dan Vogel is a true champion, hero, historian, and you deserve way more credit and way more attention and way more focus than you've been getting. And I want to do whatever I can to change that.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. And so I kind of want to still spend a few more hours with you at least, but we can't do that tonight.
No.
So is there any way to do that another time? Maybe over the internet or something?
Over the internet would be one way.
Could I interview you?
Oh, yeah.
Could we follow this up with a couple more hours?
Sure.
You'll give me some more time?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Anything we can do for you?
Questions or whatever.
Okay.
Get questions from viewers.
So we're going to continue this interview with Dan Vogel at another time, but we've just gotten started. We've got at least a few more hours. I'll just thank everyone who made this all possible. Remind everyone that check out MormonStories.org/treasure to learn about treasure digging. Look for the billboard. Donate to the billboard campaign if you want to see more billboards come in the future. And that's all at MormonStories.org/truth-claims. And look for us to be each month focusing on new topics like polygamy, like Book of Abraham, etc., so that Mormon Stories can become yet an additional record and resource for addressing Mormon truth claims. Thanks to everyone who donates to make this possible. Please go to MormonStories.org and donate if you can to keep this stuff alive. It's all tax deductible. 10, 50, $100 a month, whatever you can afford, will allow the Open Stories Foundation and me to keep generating this content and doing interviews like this. Support Dan Vogel, support Signature Books. How can people support you and Signature Books if they want to support what you're doing?
Yeah, I don't know.
Buy your books?
Yeah, buy my books, yeah.
Okay, buy his books. Yeah. And just thank you for everyone who makes all this possible, especially Cody Layton, who does the audio, video editing and production, and the Open Stories Foundation board that keeps our foundation alive. Whew! It's a bit of busy couple days, Dan, between you and the Youngs yesterday. That's like 15 hours of interviews in 2 days.
You earned your pay.
Well, you have. And again, thank you so much for all you've given us as Mormons. And check out Dan's YouTube channel. Dan's got an amazing YouTube channel of hours and hours and hours of quality scholarship. And you can check all that out as well because it's great stuff, right?
Yeah, just put my name in. You'll run right into it. Just Dan Vogel or Mormonism. Early Mormonism explained.
Yeah, it's great stuff. All right, everybody, take care. We're about to run out of space on our SD card. Stay tuned for more Mormon Stories episodes and more time with Dan Vogel in the future. Goodbye, everybody. Thanks, Dan.
Bye.